She doesn't know why she noticed you. You didn't walk in loudly. You didn't try to take up space. You didn't laugh too hard or speak too fast. You just stood there, still, present, unshaken. And that stillness, in a world addicted to movement, made everything around you feel like noise. You're not in a rush to prove yourself. You're not scanning the room for validation. You're not collapsing into performance because you've made peace with the silence inside you. That peace is rare. It's unnerving to those who haven't found it. And it's intoxicating to those who crave it. She feels it before she understands it. The way your presence pulls her eyes back. The way your calm disrupts the chaos she carries inside. The way your silence speaks louder than the men who try too hard to impress. You are still, like the center of a storm. And somewhere inside her nervous system, she feels it. This man doesn't need attention. And that's why he commands it. You don't fidget. You don't fill the air with pointless words. You don't laugh at things you don't find funny. Instead, you sit back, observe, breathe. Let the world perform while you stay rooted, like an ancient tree in a world full of leaves chasing the wind. There's something primal about this kind of presence. It doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it simply is, unmoved, unshaken. And in a world of men who try too hard, that stillness is electric. Because stillness isn't emptiness. Stillness is power under control. You didn't say much, and that said everything. Every time you speak, she notices something unfamiliar. You pause. You give space. You choose your words carefully, not because you're afraid, but because you respect your voice. You're not reacting. You're responding. And that tells her something no compliment ever could. You are not at the mercy of the moment. She doesn't consciously know this, not yet. But her body does. Her instincts do. Her curiosity does. Because here's what most men miss. You don't have to say anything clever. You don't have to be charming or loud. You just have to be real in a world that's forgotten how to be. Stillness is not a performance. It's not something you wear like a mask. It's the byproduct of inner clarity, the absence of inner noise. And that absence is magnetic. You don't interrupt. You don't shrink. You don't fumble with your phone to avoid the tension of the moment. You just sit with it, because your nervous system has learned what most men fear. Silence is not empty. It's honest. And women notice the man who doesn't flinch in silence. They notice the man who's not rushing to speak, because his presence already speaks for him. You're not cold. You're warm, but grounded, present, but unshakable. You smile, but you don't overdo it. You laugh, but not to please. You listen, but not to gain favor. And that subtle confidence tells her something deeper. You do not seek her attention to feel whole. And paradoxically, that makes her give it more. Because in a world where so many men are fragmented, distracted, or loud to be seen, you are still. Not out of apathy, but out of mastery. Stillness is not a performance. It's about being settled. The man who is settled in himself, who carries no chaos in his eyes, becomes a refuge for the woman who's tired of pretending. And when she sees you, she sees more than a man. She sees a mirror of the calm she's been chasing, of the strength she's never tasted, of the silence that feels like safety. You don't rush to fill the silence because you don't fear it. You don't perform because you don't need to be chosen. You don't shrink because you've accepted the weight of your own presence. That right there is the first subconscious signal. It's not a tactic. It's not something you do. It's something you are. And it cannot be faked. Because a man who tries to imitate stillness becomes stiff. And a man who tries to be grounded becomes performative. True stillness comes from a place deeper than effort. It comes from letting go, of needing to be liked, of proving your worth, of chasing moments that don't belong to you. When you no longer fear silence, women start to feel safe in it. Not because you control the room, but because you don't let the room control you. Her eyes linger on you longer than she intends. She doesn't understand why, not yet, but she feels it, the weight of your stillness, the gravity of your groundedness, the calm beneath your eyes. It makes her breathe deeper. It slows down her mind. It reminds her of something ancient, something sacred, something missing. She doesn't know how to say it, but something about you is hard to look away from. Stillness isn't boring. It's intimate. It tells her you have nothing to hide, that you're not desperate to escape yourself, that you're not auditioning for her approval, that you've already faced the storms most men avoid. Stillness says, I've been through fire. I've come out quiet. And that quiet is louder than confidence. Because confidence can be faked. Stillness can't. You walk slowly. You speak like every word is deliberate. You move with restraint, not from fear, but from power. You don't rush the interaction. You're not here to impress. You're not afraid what happens next, because you don't need a moment to go a certain way. You trust yourself, no matter how it unfolds. And that's rare. That's attractive in a way most men don't understand. She doesn't crave your words. She craves your presence. Because in your stillness, she feels her own noise unraveling. Stillness is the first portal. It's the signal that separates the grounded from the frantic. The man she feels pulled to, not because he reached out, but because he didn't. Because he was still. Because he was silent. Because he wasn't trying to be seen. And that made him unforgettable.
You never asked her to explain herself. You never pressed for details or demanded clarity. Because deep down, you already knew. Not through logic, not through interrogation, but through the silence between her words. Most men are too loud to hear the truth. They talk over it. They crowd it. They need proof, certainty, control. But you notice without needing to name. You catch the millisecond when her smile falters. You hear the apology hiding behind her laughter. You feel the tension beneath her lighthearted tone. It isn't magic. It's presence. It's attunement. It's a kind of psychological intimacy that no physical touch can replicate. And that's why she leans closer, even when she doesn't understand why. Because for the first time, she doesn't feel watched. She feels seen. There's something disarming about you. You walk into a room and don't need to speak. You sit across from her and don't need to perform. And yet she feels like you're already inside her story. Not in an invasive way, not like someone trying to decode her, but like someone who can feel what hurts without her ever having to say so. You don't ask, what's wrong? You simply observe the shift and offer silence wide enough for her to fill. You don't try to fix her feelings. You simply let her have them, fully, freely, without judgment. That's rare. Most men interrupt. They rush to reassure. They smooth over discomfort like it's something shameful. But you let it breathe. You don't flinch when she's vulnerable. You don't run when her wounds show. You witness, and that alone feels like healing. Because when someone looks into her like you do, she doesn't feel ashamed of her scars. She feels understood. You never needed to say, I get you, because she felt it. It's in the way your eyes stay soft when she flinches. It's in the way your body doesn't recoil when her truth gets messy. It's in the way your silence says, I see the parts you hide, and I'm still here. That's the kind of perception that unnerves people, not because it's threatening, but because it's too honest. She spent years learning to hide behind small talk, to smile on command, to package her pain in pleasant sentences. But you see through it, effortlessly. And that makes her question, who am I beneath all these masks I've worn to be loved? She thought she wanted someone to chase her. She thought she wanted charm, confidence, seduction. But now she realizes she wants someone who can read her soul without her having to explain it. When she speaks, you hear more than words. You hear why she says them. You hear how her voice tenses when she's trying not to cry. You hear the stories she skips and the ones she repeats, and what both reveal. You read her pauses. You study the rhythm of her breathing. You notice what lights up her eyes and what dims them. And slowly, something sacred begins to unfold. She starts telling you things she never told anyone. Not because you pushed, but because your presence feels like an invitation, like a doorway she didn't know existed, like a safe house built in the quiet corners of your attention. She talks, and you just listen. But not like the others. You're not waiting to reply. You're not trying to relate it back to your story. You're not nodding to be polite. You're there, fully. And that kind of attention, that rare, undivided, anchored awareness, feels more intimate than touch. You don't compete for control. You don't try to outshine her. You don't need to dominate the room to feel powerful, because your power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being aware. You see the room. You see the dynamics. You see what people need, what they avoid, what they're afraid to admit. And she sees that in you. She notices the way your eyes scan a space, not for validation, but for truth. She notices the way you notice others, how you let people speak, even when they're wrong, how you let them reveal themselves without needing to correct them. She realizes you're not passive, you're strategic. You're not quiet because you have nothing to say. You're quiet because you're absorbing everything. And when you do speak, it lands. Your words cut through noise like a blade through silk. Not harsh, but precise. Not emotional, but felt. Because when you say something, she knows it's not reactive. It's not random. It's not for approval. It's because you mean it. And in a world where everyone is posturing, your sincerity hits her like a revelation. She tries to look away from you sometimes, not because she intimidates you, but because you see through her, and that's terrifying. She's used to hiding behind distractions, behind roles, behind humor, but you reflect all of it back. You are the mirror she didn't know she needed and didn't know she feared. Not the kind that flatters, but the kind that shows what's buried, gently. She starts to feel something she's rarely allowed to feel with men. Safe, while being fully seen. And in that safety, something beautiful happens. Her voice softens. Her armor drops. Her walls lower. She begins to unfold. She stops talking like she's defending herself. She starts talking like she's remembering herself. You didn't rescue her. You didn't fix her. You didn't do anything to her. You simply gave her the space to come back home to herself, and that is addictive. Because here's the secret most men don't understand. A woman doesn't fall for you because of what you say. She falls for how she feels about herself when she's near you. And around you, she feels intelligent. She feels felt. She feels worthy, not for what she offers, but for who she is when no one's watching. You don't just attract her attention, you awaken her self-respect. You don't just make her feel beautiful, you make her feel real. And that kind of emotional clarity, that kind of psychological safety, it's rarer than chemistry. It's deeper than compatibility. It's spiritual. But here's what she doesn't realize yet. What she sees in you is only possible because you've trained your vision. You've sat with your own wounds. You've listened to your own silence. You've faced the parts of yourself most people run from. And that's why you can hold space for hers. You are not a passive observer. You are an empathetic mirror, forged through solitude, self-awareness, and discipline. You don't just see her, you recognize her. And in doing so, you help her recognize herself. She doesn't know why she trusts you so quickly. She doesn't know why your silence feels louder than anyone's words. But when your eyes meet hers, she feels like you've already read the chapter she's too afraid to write. And even though she doesn't fully understand it yet, she knows one thing: you make her feel visible. And she never knew how much she needed that.
She's used to being chased, but now she's chasing something she can't even name. There's something about you that makes her pause. It's not your words, it's not your presence alone. It's what's missing, or what's not being shown. Because when she looks at you, she senses a storm behind still water, a contradiction she can't define. You don't give too much, you don't hold too little. You exist in that perfect tension, like the final note of a song that hasn't resolved. And that's what hooks her. She's not used to this, to uncertainty, to being the one who leans forward while the other leans back. But here you are, not withholding, just unhurried, unbothered, unreadable. And something in her begins to ache, not with pain, but with fascination. Because what she really craves, even if she doesn't know it, is not answers, it's tension, mystery, depth. Not a man who reveals everything in the first 10 minutes, but one who feels like an unopened book, heavy with meaning, yet patient enough to let her turn the pages. And you are that book. Not a performer, not a puzzle, just quietly complex. You're not emotionally detached, you're emotionally contained. There's a difference. Most men either overshare, dumping their emotional wounds on her to seem vulnerable, or they shut down, hiding everything behind cold eyes and hard silences. But you feel. She can see that. She feels the weight in your gaze, the way you pause before you speak, the moments where something flashes across your face and then disappears, like a ghost passing behind the curtain of your soul. And that moment, that flicker, stays with her. Because it wasn't an act. It wasn't manipulation. It was real. And real is rare. You don't seek to be known, but you don't resist being seen either. That's the paradox. She leans in because you don't try to convince her. You let her feel her way through you. You let her observe, not to impress, but to witness. And that witnessing becomes addictive. You become a mirror, a story, a question. She finds herself wondering things she's never thought about anyone before. Where did he learn to look like that? What made him that calm? Why does his silence feel heavier than most people's noise? It doesn't make her anxious. It makes her alive. Because you're not giving her all the answers. You're giving her space to discover them. You have shadows, and you're not afraid of them. That's what really draws her. Not your perfection, but your ownership of imperfection. She senses that you've been through fire, not because you talk about it, but because your eyes hold the smoke. There's a gravity in men who have faced their demons and made peace with them. You don't try to be light all the time. You don't perform positivity. You allow the weight of life to show up without letting it consume the room. That's the energy of emotional power. Not repression, not performance, but integration. And it's that integration that makes her feel safe, even if she doesn't know why. She knows that you've felt deeply, that you've lost something, and that you've rebuilt something stronger from it. And without saying a word, you've told her everything. You don't chase, and yet she can't stop thinking about you. That's not a game. It's a frequency. You've detached from needing to be chosen, and that detachment is magnetic. Because while every other man tries to win her, you simply are. You're not trying to sell her a version of yourself. You're not trying to prove your worth. And in that, you become worthy. She leans toward your silence. She studies your stillness. She replays the way you looked at her, not with hunger, but with knowing. And the more she tries to understand you, the deeper she falls into herself. Because the truth is, you're not the mystery. She is. You just reflect it back to her. You don't speak in a way that demands attention, but your energy does. And it's not about being loud. It's about being undeniable. You speak when it matters. You leave silence in the spaces where most men fumble. You're not afraid to let the moment breathe. And in that breath, she finds herself longing. Because you've given her something rare. Curiosity. You've become the man she can't quite figure out, not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the need to be explained. You aren't emotionally available. You're emotionally sovereign. That word hits different, because she's used to men being one of two things: overeager or emotionally blocked. But you're neither. You're emotionally open, but not leaking. You're emotionally present, but not grasping. You're emotionally expressive, but not performative. It's subtle. It's felt. And it pulls her in without a single effort. You don't use words to seduce. You use presence to disarm. And in that disarmament, she realizes something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. She doesn't need you to say more. She just wants to feel more. And the more she feels, the less control she has. You've become the thing she doesn't want to admit, the one she can't stop thinking about, the one who didn't try to take anything, the one who gave her space to feel things she didn't know were inside her. You're not trying to be addictive, but your energy already is, because it's calm, it's anchored, it's mysterious, it's unbothered by validation. You don't show all your cards, not to withhold, but because you don't need approval to breathe. And that is the secret behind your magnetism. You are the man who owns himself. And to a woman starving for substance, there is nothing more intoxicating. So now she wonders, what is it about him? Why do I feel like I've met him before? Why does his presence echo in my chest hours after he's gone? And the answer isn't in words, it's in energy. Because you don't answer her curiosity, you awaken it. And now, she's chasing something she can't even name, but it looks a lot like you.
She starts wondering what world lives inside you where she doesn't control your light. She watches you and waits for the moment you lean in, the moment you show the need. But it doesn't come, because you're not here to fill a void. You're not holding out an empty cup. You're holding a flame, not begging to be lit. And in a world where most men crumble at the first sign of affection, you remain lit from within. Not cold, not indifferent, but untouched. And that difference is a language she feels in her spine. You don't chase, you don't cling, you don't perform for approval. Because you don't need her to feel whole. You already are. She's used to men who collapse. She's used to admiration, used to the sudden shift when attention turns to obsession. She's seen that look before. The one that says, "You complete me." It flatters her, then bores her. Because no one wants to be someone else's oxygen tank. And you breathe on your own. You don't suffocate when she pulls away. You aren't baited by her silence. You don't panic when she withdraws. You just remain. Unbothered, present, full. You feel like a world untouched by her. There's a strange seduction in your independence. It's not arrogance, not aloofness. It's the mystery of a man who is home within himself. You're not cold, you're calm. You're not detached, you're directed. Your validation doesn't rise and fall with her tone of voice. Your mood doesn't shift with her attention. You feel like a universe spinning gently, with or without her gravity. And that drives her mad in the most delicious way. Because most men don't know who they are without her. They become what she wants. They say what they think she'll like. They contort themselves to fit into her story. But you don't. You are not a prop. You are not a side character. You are not waiting for permission to live boldly. You know your purpose. You've seen your own darkness. You've stared into your own abyss and didn't blink. That's why you don't beg. That's why you don't chase. That's why you're not performing. You're already enough, in your stillness, in your solitude, in your sovereignty. She begins to see you differently. At first, she tried to read you like every other man, but you don't follow the script. You're not predictable. You're not reactive. You're a mirror, a riddle, a flame that doesn't flicker when she exhales. And that silence, that emotional containment, that stillness within you, it draws her in. She can't control it. She can't define it, and that makes it irresistible. You speak in energy, not desperation. You don't text 10 times when she goes quiet. You don't accidentally show up where she is. You don't explode in jealousy when she gets attention, because you have no need to grasp. You have no interest in control. You're too busy building something deeper, within. And she can feel that. She senses that your attention isn't a leash. It's a gift, freely given, easily withdrawn. That's what makes her respect it. That's what makes her crave it. She's addicted to the calm you carry. Most people live in emotional noise. They need constant stimulation, validation, performance. But you're rooted. You feel like peace. You don't overreact. You don't over-explain. You don't try to prove your worth. You know it. Silently, unshakably. You're the kind of man she can't shake from her thoughts, not because you did something loud, but because you stayed silent and it wasn't empty. It was full of depth, full of energy, full of presence. When you don't need her, she begins to need you. Not in the way of dependence, but in the way of obsession. You become the unresolved question in her mind. You become the quiet echo she keeps replaying. You become the mirror she didn't expect to see herself in. Because you weren't trying to get her. You were simply being you. Unafraid to walk away, unafraid to stand still, unafraid to love, but never beg. There's power in your absence. If she pulls away, you don't crumble, you don't panic, you don't chase. You vanish, with elegance, with clarity, with peace. Not as punishment, not as a game, but because you know any connection that threatens your peace is a cage, not chemistry. And she feels that, she sees that, she remembers that, because no one forgets the man who doesn't try to convince them. You become the flame she can't blow out. You're not trying to burn her, you're not trying to blind her, you're not trying to impress her. You simply burn, silently, boldly, steadily. And in a world of wildfire men who burn fast and collapse, you become the one fire she keeps returning to, because it never asks her to give herself up. It only asks her to feel. This is the paradox of power. The more you don't need her, the more she wants to be near you. Not because of a game, but because of your gravity, because of the unshakable truth that lives inside your chest. And so, slowly, quietly, she begins to orbit you. Not because you chased, but because you didn't.
She starts wondering what world lives inside you, where she doesn't control your light. She watches you, not just with her eyes, but with the intuitive radar women develop over years of deciphering people who say one thing and feel another. And yet, you're different. You don't give her an emotional blueprint. There's no full access pass to your inner world. You're present, yes. You're emotionally available, yes. But you're not decoded. There's a mystery in the way you pause before answering, the way you smile like you've seen the story play out before, the way your eyes don't rush to explain everything, even when silence stretches. She can't tell if it's confidence or caution, but either way, it's magnetic. Because in a world where everyone's trying to prove themselves, you're not performing. You're not hiding, but you're not easy to fully grasp either. You're not a book she can finish in one night. You're a riddle with emotional gravity, and that is the kind of man who lives in her mind rent-free. The male aura that doesn't seek validation. You don't need her to see you. You don't drop hints hoping she'll notice your depth. You don't rush to correct her impression of you. You let her be wrong, at least for now. Because you're not trying to be liked, you're trying to be real. And that terrifies the part of her that's used to power. The part that knows how to emotionally control men by reading them, mirroring them, taming them. But you are untamed. Not because you're distant, but because you are fully claimed by yourself. And when a man is owned by his own internal world, by his own standards, thoughts, and quiet philosophies, he's immune to emotional manipulation. She realizes if she wants to be close to you, she'll have to be real too. Not performative, not charming, real. And that's the most uncomfortable, electrifying feeling she's had in a long time. You don't need to be known, and that changes everything. Here's the paradox. Most people crave to be understood. They shape their identity around how others see them. They chase clarity, legibility, and recognition. But you live comfortably in the gray. You're not afraid of being misunderstood because your identity isn't up for negotiation. You're not addicted to being figured out. You're addicted to integrity. She asks you something personal. You smile, you nod, you answer partially, and then you say, "Some things I'm still learning how to explain." You don't evade, you reveal, just not everything all at once. That layered honesty disorients her. She's used to men either over-explaining or under-committing, but you are something entirely different. You speak like a man who has secrets, not because you're hiding, but because you understand the sacredness of what hasn't fully emerged yet. You carry mystery with dignity, and that is the type of man who leaves an imprint on the feminine psyche. You leave open loops, but you're not playing games. You're not a manipulator. You're not playing emotional hide-and-seek, but you do leave open loops. You share a story, but not the ending. You mention a childhood dream, but not whether you still chase it. You hint at a painful chapter, but don't need to bleed it all out to be believed. You live in that subtle dance between openness and restraint, and she feels that tension in her chest, the desire to know more, to lean in closer, to ask what's beneath that unspoken truth you never forced into the light. That's the kind of intimacy she doesn't expect, the kind that doesn't offer itself easily, the kind she has to grow into, not consume on demand. And that is what makes you unforgettable. Women don't want to solve you. They want to experience you. They want to feel who you are when you're unguarded, not dissect the mechanics of your pain, your past, or your potential. But most men flood them with over-explained vulnerability, like a resume of wounds. You, on the other hand, invite her into moments, not monologues. You let your silence speak. You let your contradictions breathe. You let your emotional presence do the heavy lifting. And in that space, she doesn't feel like she needs to figure you out. She feels something deeper, the rare safety of being around a man who doesn't need to be exposed to be felt.
A man who can be both storm and shelter. Known, but not consumed. She feels you, even when you're not there. That's the mark you leave. Not a flirty text, not a well-placed compliment, but an emotional residue, a psychological echo. She finds herself thinking about you, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say. Not because of how much attention you gave her, but because of how much attention you gave yourself. You don't chase her memory. You simply exist in a way that echoes. In her dreams, in her doubts, in the space between relationships that feel too easy to predict. You're not a thrill. You're a presence that lingers like a favorite song she can't name, only feel. Mystery is not confusion. It's depth without demand. Let's be clear, you're not confusing her. You're not a puzzle. You're not inconsistent. You're emotionally available, but not emotionally owned. You show up with honesty, but not desperation. You offer depth, but not dependency. And that is rare, because the feminine isn't drawn to chaos. She's drawn to emotional complexity. And complexity isn't about being unreadable. It's about having layers that can't be skimmed in a glance. Layers that require presence, patience, and the kind of emotional courage few ever develop. You are that man. And in her eyes, you're not confusing. You're containing. You're not aloof. You're aware. And you're not a mystery because you're empty. You're a mystery because you're whole. She doesn't know why she stays on your mind, but she knows this. With you, there's always something more to feel. Something more to understand, something more to become. And that mystery, that's not a game, that's not manipulation, that's the energy of a man who knows you don't need to be fully explained to be fully unforgettable.